Hi, I'm Tony DeLacy, and in this video I'd like to talk about rejection. And it's a very complicated subject, rejection. And we've experienced it, we've all experienced it so many times. And if you're watching this video, you might be hoping for an answer to why you might have been rejected recently, or just want to get answers in general. And the difficulty with this is because it can be very individual, very specific as to why you experienced rejection in some way. Not only relationships, but also could be more professional. But with relationships, it's much easier, actually, to discover why you have had the experience you've had, that you've been said no to. And we'll focus a lot more on that in terms of the rejection from a more personal sense. Because sometimes when it comes to rejection in a professional sense, there can be a set criteria. But there are a few things that I will mention that might have meaning and might help you out with maybe some of those answers. A rejection in terms of friends as well. But I think the harder one, but the one that everyone wants to find out is why we got rejected. Why someone said no to us. And I'm going to try and show you reasons why people will say no to you. And it comes in two stages, but I'll get back to that in a minute. But when it comes to rejection, when it comes to someone saying no, the first thing that you must think about is, well, let's look at the context. Rather than all these questions that you might be asking, let's first assess the context. Now, if you've been rejected, if you've had that, it's no less painful, to be honest, but if you've had that, if someone said no to you pretty early on, maybe a day, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, but not necessarily just early on, perhaps you two have been out for a drink together, or dinner, but not much more than that. The reason for that kind of rejection is because perhaps there are a few things that you two were diametrically opposed at. And for you to understand this, you're going to have to be honest with yourself and the experience. See, when you get rejected, the mind tries to conjure up stories, conjure up thoughts and memories where perhaps none existed. So it's very important to think about what happened as objectively and honestly as possible. So if it's only been a 2 or 3 days, just think of, were you actually compatible in some way? Were there a couple of things where you felt there was some resistance, say, over something maybe very fundamental to you? And you might not have realized it, but perhaps that was something that was very much taken into consideration with the other person. See, when it comes to trying to find a connection, the clue is in the word. For two things to connect, they have to be of a similar or same piece. And perhaps that was something that perhaps you didn't quite get. Neither of you should blame yourselves for it. You shouldn't blame yourself for not finding someone of a similar fit. And that in terms of professional, in terms of personal, how you look after yourself, how you see the world, how open you two are. All of these very fundamental questions about whether two people will get along. And those are the things you have to find out. And be honest when you find out. And hopefully you were honest, rather than trying to be something who you weren't. Because people can see into that. They can see past it as well. So hopefully you didn't do that and you were as honest as possible, so you can get as honest a reading as to whether you two were compatible. So that's generally one of the big reasons why you two weren't compatible in some way, if that was the case. After 1 or 2 dates, let's say. You know, maybe it's something to do with that. Most of the time it is. And whether the person who you're seeing in front of you, you can imagine, okay, going on to the next step, which is doing more than just eating dinner or having a drink. Could they see that being the case? Could they see one progressing? If you cannot see a progression, well, there you are. And that stems from connections, similarities, personality similarities. You know, they say opposites attract. But I don't really think that that applies to everything. Moving on, it gets a lot more fundamental and a lot more complicated as to why you might have felt rejection later on into dating, had you progressed to something more. Something over, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even more. But it's more whether you experienced certain activities that you two did. And the more intimate the activity, the more we can assess. And the more maybe this video becomes even more relevant to you. What happened for the rejection to have occurred. And funny enough, it gets a lot more straightforward in terms of, hopefully, what I'm going to tell you. So, it's been a few weeks. You two have dated. It's been a few months. You two have dated. And you've been incredibly intimate with each other. And that is something which can only really happen if two people feel that connected to each other. That there are certain similarities, and you only really get to that stage because fundamentally all those things were there. And that's huge. It's amazing when two people find such great connections together. So, if, and perhaps for you, when that rejection occurred, it became all the more confusing. And now I'm really talking about in any relationship now, post the initial dating, to whether you were with each other for weeks, months, or even years. If you establish the initial connection, then let's try and understand why rejection then occurred. Because funnily enough, it becomes less logical the longer you're with someone. Well, that's the perception. But actually, the reason someone might reject you becomes clearer. But not less clear in terms of their interests and everything, but their, or indeed your personality yourself. So this is where we come to the two-stage process of why you feel you got rejected, or why someone did something devastating to you. In the first stage, the first thing you should do is look at yourself. Look at why you were there in the first place. Look at who you are in the first place. Are you someone? And let's ask these questions and answer them with me if you like. Think about yourself fundamentally. Were you in this relationship honestly? Did you tell the complete truth about you honestly? You might be saying, yes, of course. Fine. Great. As long as you did, because if you didn't, if you were not honest in everything that you did, in everything that you felt, in everything that you believed, in everything, and you were as open as possible, if you weren't that, that's a huge source of an issue. And the other person can look at that. And that can be something really fundamental. If someone cannot trust you, if someone thinks that you're being dishonest, if someone thinks that you cannot share such fundamental things as feelings and emotions, then going back to what was said about, initially dating, if someone cannot see you as honest, they cannot see you in the future. Or they cannot trust who you might be in the future. And that is very fundamental. So ask yourself that. Were you truthful and honest? Secondly, what was your motivation? Was your motivation to find something truthful about the other person? Was it to forge something really meaningful with the other person? Because if you were thinking of something short term, it can be picked up. If you were thinking something rather than them, but just the idea of them, that can be something that's picked up. So you look at that honestly. But thirdly, and this is almost importantly of all, is as you're going about your life, are you doing it, one, with you in mind, not selfishly, but with the motivation coming from you rather than some sort of self-sacrifice? Were you doing it were you trying to make your life better? Are you trying to make your life better? Because if that's what you're doing, then everything else you do will be to try to make things better. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of living. If you're trying to make your life better, then everything else you do, that motivation will seep into. If you're not, then look at it. Look at the other things that you're doing. For example, if you smoke, well, that's not trying to make your life better. That's shortening your life, making it worse, and is self-destructive. If you do that, for example, then when it comes to a relationship, how does those two, you smoking and having a relationship, it's still you that's involved here. So were you in it? Or were you in this relationship to make your life better? Or was there another motivation? And this seeps into, are you pursuing something noble? Which means, are you trying to pursue the greatest good possible within your life? If you are, then it'll seep into the relationship. And someone should be receptive for that. Saying, look, this person is trying to make their life better. And in that process, they've involved me in it. And that's fantastic. But if you're not doing that, if you're not trying to make your life better, then why does someone want to be with you in that situation, in that stance? So the reason someone might have rejected you is because you aren't pursuing something fantastic, something magnificent, wonderful, truthful, noble, honest as well. Comes straight back into it. So think about it. Were you in the relationship because, one, you're trying to make your life better, and you thought this would help do that? As an aside, not the driving force, but definitely a major part of it, a major piece of armor to your suit of armor, so to speak. Were you trying to make your life better with that? Because someone will join the ride with you there, because it is that exciting. And asking the ultimate question, which is, are you leading a fantastic life? If you are, well then tick. Hopefully you are, because then we can move on as well. But you've got to have a look and see what your motivations are. And then lastly, when it comes to questioning you, and again, very importantly, is what was your perception of the other person? And this is hardest of all to answer. One, because you might not know. It might not be very clear for you. But two, it might be the most painful question of all to ask. What was your perception of the other person? Now, if you were seeking honesty and truth, if you and the other person were as honest as you could be, which is usually 100% honest, that perception would have been in the most amazing light. It was so honest. And so your perception is probably as true as it could be. But think of your perception, what you perceive, and what you perceive is coloured by your motivation. What were you motivated to do? Because when you have a motivation, everything else kind of goes away from your mind, and you're pursuing that motivation. Hopefully, it is to better your life and the other person's. Completely. But if your motivation was something other than that, your perception is going to change, because you'll be focusing on pursuing that. Which is why, for example, sometimes someone could be doing something really nice for you, but it's not what you don't get the desired response from you is not good enough, because maybe what you're pursuing in terms of motivation, what they're pursuing is very different. And so the perception of that activity, for example, will be different to the two different people. And the emotions will be different, because the emotions are predicated on how well you're doing to get that goal, your motivation for that goal. So all of these things are interlinked. But look at the perception of that person, and look at the perception that it's all from your point of view. We're still asking the question of you, how you perceived that person. Because if you perceived them differently, if you perceive them with a different lens, then that can answer the question maybe of why you're so confused, because perhaps you didn't see things honestly. because your emotions were driven by whatever you're motivated to get to that goal, rather than maybe the more honest one. So you have to ask yourself those questions. And because that's what motivates you, that's what motivates you in a relationship, is what your goal is. And you have essentially three emotions towards that goal in terms of the motivation towards going to get it. One is positive emotions. You're going towards it. You're trying to achieve it. The second emotion, which is, I don't know what's happening, I'm going to stop. That's where anxiety pops in. You know, something happens that comes up against you. Something that, you know, a problem about, you know, as you're going to reach the goal, something comes up. You go, oh, that's where the anxiety comes in. So you're not entirely sure, this is not where I want to be. You know, if, for example, a relationship, you think you're both headed in the same way, and then something comes up and you're really worried. And then you stop. And then the third feeling, third emotion, when you're motivated towards a goal, is pain, and so you just go away. You give up. You stop. And it's all based on your perception of how you're doing. Your perception of the other person as well. Because they're connected in all of this. So we've asked those questions. Sort of a series of 4 in a way. And if you can answer them very well and very honestly, and say, yes, I saw as true an occasion as I could. Yes, I'm trying to better my life, and at the same time try to help better their life too. My motivation was that. I was being as noble as possible, and I perceive them in the most honest light because I answered all those 3 other questions in the affirmative. Then you can join me on the harder one, on the harder set of questions, which is step 2. And they're all the same questions, but they're of the other person. I know. And that's hard. Because we've hopefully, as you've come with me, you've tried to diagnose your own person, so to speak. Now you ask exactly the same questions of that other person. Were they completely honest with you? Because if they weren't honest with you, then of course you're going to feel like, I thought we were both being honest. And that rejection will come out of nowhere. You won't know that that's happened. You'll be asking the questions going, well, I thought we were doing well. I was being honest. I was there. So what's going on here? Then you move on to the second bit. You say, well, what was that? You know, were they trying to make their lives better? Or were they focusing on themselves and making their lives better, and they wanted you to come along for the ride as well to, you know, try to help you do the same? Well, look. You have to ask that question, were they doing that? And maybe to find out the answer, you look at what was the motivation. What were they trying to pursue? Were they trying to pursue something meaningful? Or all that time they were trying to pursue something that had a time that could have an ending? See, in a relationship, if you're honest and everything's going well, you don't see an ending. You don't see an end game. The goal is having a better life. That doesn't stop. That keeps going. Because you don't just want to make today better, you want to make tomorrow and the day after better. But if the motivation is different, more short term. Even if that short term is still, 3, 4, 5 years or something like that, then it can be the reason for a rejection, or the reason for such anger and hostility up until then. You have to be honest. What were they there for? What were you dealing with? Who were you dealing with? What were they trying to get from this situation? From being in a relationship? I mean, the answer might be terrible, but personally, I think you deserve to know. It's hard to broach that question because some people won't know that. You want to find that motivation. What were you trying to achieve? Because if it was something short term, then it's not going to make their lives better. Because if you're not trying to seek something noble, trying to seek something, small and insignificant, loads of people do it because, one, it abjects they don't have to take responsibility for it, and so what the hell matters? I mean, you don't matter as soon as they get rid of you. That's certainly what it feels like to you. Because then what the hell? They'll because we're all humans, we're all still goal orientated. It's just that their goal will be more petty. And you were just collateral damage along the way to getting what they want. Something short term. That's what you class vain people in, for example. Something short term, and you were just, I don't want to say you were being used, but I'll come up with a different word then. Because if that was the case, then let's answer the last bit. How do they perceive you then? See, people who are nihilistic surround themselves with such petty goals, like, I want to get this amount of money, for example. What's that going to do for you? I want to experience this. I want to sleep with that person of such an attractiveness. Or get this experience with that person because I haven't, but as soon as I do get it, or get enough of it, then I can be done with them. Those kind of people, for what I will say is, don't worry. Because they'll keep surrounding themselves with this, but it'll just be empty, and it won't be enough, and they will feel empty, and they will feel nothing. Until they get their act together. And say, actually, I do want to pursue something meaningful. But some people, it takes trial and error. Of getting what they want and going, oh no, this isn't helping me feel better. Of course it doesn't. Because you've thrown away responsibility and meaning just to get a feeling, or to be able to say, "Oh, you did it." And so, how did they perceive you? If they were not trying to get the best that they wanted in their lives, if their motivation was something more petty, if they weren't honest with you, how did they perceive you? Not in an honest light. They didn't see you in an honest light. They didn't give you a chance. Maybe they gave you glimmers. But be honest. Did they see you for who you really are? Because if you've said yes to everything in terms of asking these questions, and you have done all that, you are a good person, you were honest, trying to make your life better, trying to make their lives better at the same time, or help them. If they didn't see, if their motivation was totally different and nowhere near as nice as you, or not nice at all, they wouldn't have perceived you as that honest, great person. And there you are. Trust me, it's not a nice thing to think about. And I'm sorry. But let's diagnose it that way. If you were rejected, and you feel so empty, so annoyed, and asking the questions about why did they do this, especially after we'd been so intimate together, for example, when we'd shared such amazing experiences together. You don't share those experiences and then break it off for it to be an amicable thing. Oh sure, you can be friends and everything. See how that turns out. But look at it. Diagnose the situation. And then see what you could have seen before it ended. I mean, that's for next time, for later, let's say. But, yeah. I know it's something that's going to be painful, and it'll take a bit of soul searching to find out, but hopefully that will help you understand why it happened. And you can see either yourself, well, probably you can see yourself in a hopefully a better light, should you pass the test, so to speak. Or it'll tell you what you need to work on. Or it'll shine a light on who they really were and who they really saw you as. And then you can move on to the next person, and you will look for all the things that you need to see. Are they being honest with me? What is their motivation? Are they trying to better their lives? Do they want me to be a part of that? And so do they perceive me in the truth, in the most honest light? And then you can answer those before it gets too long, before it gets too painful. And so you'll never feel like you are feeling right now. No longer will you feel confused. No longer will you feel, why on earth did this happen? Because you're going to see things for what they really are, who they really were. And with that knowledge, it'll help you move on. And move on quickly. I know it does sound a bit hard to do, but once you understand this, once you find it out, you'll know what to do better next time. And then you'll stop thinking about them. You only look at the back at the past because you haven't learned a lesson. And the lesson is, how do I make sure I never feel like I do again, like this again? And once you've answered the questions, and I've just given you the questions, the brain will go, I release you from the pain. I release you from the memories. Because we don't need to think about them again. And you'll be free. And so the next opportunity that comes to you could be tomorrow. You don't know. But it could. And you want to be ready for it. And there we are. Now, of course, there are loads of individual reasons why two people can break up. And maybe the answer's already there for you. But if you're feeling hurt, if you're feeling like you don't know what happened, there's the list. There's the criteria. Not only to understanding, but to be free from it. To actually move on. To answer the actual questions that you're trying to think of. Diagnose yourself. Diagnose the other person. And move forward on your own. Increasing your integrity as an individual. And you will feel braver the next time. Because you'll know what to look out for. And then you'll be free to move on, to be braver, to see people for who they really are, even yourself. Thank you.